and welcome to the BNP Paribas Asset Management Talking Heads podcast. Every week, Talking Heads will bring you in-depth insights and analysis through the lens of sustainability on the topics that really matter to investors. In this episode, we'll be discussing evolution of the ETF markets. I'm Daniel Morris, Chief Market Strategist, and I'm joined today by Danielle Dornel, Head of ETF Research. Welcome, Danielle, and thanks for joining me.
Hello, Daniel. Very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
We spoke last October and talked then about how it had been a good quarter for UCITS ETFs. What can you tell us about the last quarter of 2025?
For the third time, we had a quarter above 80 billion euros of inflows for UCITS ETFs. With exactly 88 billion in Q4, we reached a record-breaking level for 2025 at 325 billion. This is an increase of 20% compared to 2024, which was already an all-time high for UCITS ETF flows. Looking at the split by asset classes in Q4, we had just under 60 billion euros on equities, and this is slightly down compared to last quarter. And on fixed income, we had the highest quarter ever with over 28 billion euros. This is significantly up compared to Q3.
Could you give us a bit more detail on what you think has attracted investors in terms of regions, but maybe also sectors, themes?
On equities, over 25 billion in inflows were on global exposures in Q4, which is in line with the impressive trend during the whole year, with over 100 billion in inflows into global equities in 2025. This was followed by emerging market, with just under 13 billion in Q4, of which 2.5 billion euros were on China equities. Once again, this was a record year for emerging market, with roughly 35 billion in inflows, and this was mostly in the second part of the year. On European equities, with 10 billion in Q4, it was in line with the previous quarter, and this is setting a new yearly record at 60 billion for European equities. And to put things in perspective, the previous record was at 35 billion, and this was in 2015. Flows were also positive on US equities, but at only 7 billion roughly. This is a relatively low level compared to previous years. In terms of sub-asset classes, we have observed interesting flows on sector and thematic exposures with just under 8 billion, led mostly by IT and more especially China tech, followed by healthcare, which is a sector that had one of the best performances in Q4. And finally, financials and more especially European banks, which also had interesting performance last quarter.
At the beginning, Danielle, you mentioned that fixed income flows were at record highs, and we appreciate that that's a category within ETFs that's developing quickly. What are the categories of products that have been driving the flows?
In Q4, flows were heavily biased towards euro-denominated bonds, with just under 15 billion euros, followed by global and US bonds. In terms of sub-asset classes, the lead is shared between ultra-short and corporate investment grade bonds at around 8 billion euros over the quarter. For ultra-short, this was the conclusion of an outstanding year with over 27 billion in 2025, which represents over a third of the total fixed income flows last year. As a reminder, we are talking here about ultra-short duration products, such as government bonds with maturity from 0 to 1 year or overnight exposures. On corporate investment grade, the flows were mostly directed towards euro-denominated short duration. Government bonds also gathered around 6 billion, mostly on global and eurozone exposures. And for the first time this year, we saw significant flows on aggregate exposures with over 2 billion over the quarter.
Danielle, we've covered equities, we've talked about fixed income. Any other interesting trends in the last quarter?
The first one is definitely active ETFs, with over 8 billion in flows this quarter, to finish the year at around 25 billion, which is by far the highest level for active ETFs. Active ETFs represented just under 9% of the flows last year. To put that into perspective, the market share of active ETF in terms of asset under management is only 3%. So it's an outstanding share of the flows that this product category have represented. The trend on active ETF is not only about flows, but also about product launches. And that's something I wanted to mention. Around 40% of the ETF launches in Europe have been on active strategies, and this shows the important focus of ETF providers on this product category. Finally, a word on ESG. So here we are talking about products that embed environmental, social, or governance aspects to the selection process of the indices. With almost 25 billion inflows into this category in Q4, this was the highest quarter for ESG since the end of 2022. In terms of market share, it represents around 25 to 30% of the overall flows this quarter, which is a lot higher than what we have observed in the last 2 years. It's also interesting to see that it's also true about equity product. This was a lot more difficult over the last few years.
Thank you, Daniel. If I can summarize some of the key points, you started with the observation that we had a record level of inflows to UCITS ETFs in 2025. In the mix then between fixed income and equities, you had higher flows into fixed income, slightly lower flows into equities. But interestingly, within equities, increasing flows to non-US funds, EM and Europe, for example, but somewhat lower for the US. You also highlighted increasing interest in active ETFs, with active ETFs representing a meaningful share of new launches. And finally, you pointed out that despite concerns that some have had about the outlook for ESG investing, you had one of the highest quarters of flows to ESG funds. Well, Daniel, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It was a pleasure.
That's it for this week's episode of Talking Heads. If you would like more information about our ETF capabilities, please reach out to your asset management contact or check out Viewpoint, our website for investment insights at viewpoint.bnpparibas-am.com. Just before we go, I'd like to mention that the Talking Heads podcast is available on Spotify and YouTube. For YouTube, visit youtube.com/bnppam/playlist and tap or click on Talking Heads. You've been listening to the BNP Paribas Asset Management Talking Heads podcast with me, Daniel Morris, and Danielle Dornel, Head of ETF Research. Please do join me next week. Until then, take care.
This presentation includes a discussion on current market events and is not intended as investment advice or an offer of products or services by BNP Paribas Asset Management. Please keep in mind that the information and analysis in this presentation is only current as of the publication date.